Te koto te whānau o Auckland Unitarians. Te koto nā manahiri. No mai, higher mai ki te rei whakarakia. A te atua, te koto, te tatau katoa. Welcome. Welcome to all who have chosen to gather together in this space made sacred by Auckland Unitarians for 116 years. May we remember when you share with me what is most important to you. That is where listening begins. When I show you that I hear you, when I say your life matters, that is where compassion begins. When I open the door to greet you, that is where hospitality begins. When I venture out to bring you to shelter, that is where love begins. When I risk my comfort to ease your suffering, when I act against hatred, violence, and injustice, that is where courage begins. When we experience the full presence of each other, because of our shared humanity, because of our differences, that is where holy gratitude begins. May this space be a table that is not complete until all are welcome. May this table be a space of beauty where together we create a sense of miracles and where all that we share is sacred. We especially welcome you today if you are here for the first time. Just a little heads up, the service really doesn't end until you've shared a cuppa with us at morning tea. It is our sacrament of hospitality, and it won't be complete without you. This morning is about stories, ours in particular. Our stories are shaped by the stories that inspire or surprise us. I would like to share one of my all-time favorites that caught me unaware many years ago the first time I read it. It is from Victor Hugo's Les Miserables. It tells of the protagonist, Jean Valjean, a poor man on the run. He takes shelter in the home of the Monsignor, Bishop Bienvenu, Bishop Welcome, for the night, but steals his silver and makes a run for it in the early morning. While breakfasting, the bishop is interrupted by 3 gendarmes who have Valjean in custody. The story continues with the bishop approaching Valjean. "Ah, here you are," he exclaimed, looking at Jean Valjean. "I'm glad to see you." "Well, but how is this? I gave you the candlesticks too, which are of silver like the rest, and for which you can certainly get 200 francs. Why did you not carry them away with your forks and spoons?" Jean Valjean opened his eyes wide and stared at the venerable bishop with an expression which no human tongue can render any account of. "Monsignor," said the brigadier of the gendarmes, "so what this man said is true then? We came across him. He was walking like a man who was running away. We stopped him to look into the matter. He had this silver." "And he told you," interposed the bishop with a smile, "that it had been given to him by a kind old fellow of a priest with whom he had passed the night. I see how the matter stands, and you have brought him back here. It is a mistake." "In that case," replied the brigadier, "we can let him go?" "Certainly," replied the bishop. The gendarmes released Jean Valjean, who recoiled. "Is it true that I am to be released?" he said, in an almost inarticulate voice, and as though he were talking in his sleep. "Yes, thou art released. Dost thou not understand?" said one of the gendarmes. "My friend," resumed the bishop, "before you go, here are your candlesticks. Take them." Upon reading this the first time, unbid tears streamed down my face. It is a story that not only redeems Jean Valjean, but all who hear it. With humility and courage, born of our story, we are called as Unitarians to build the beloved community, where all souls are welcome as blessings, and the human family lives whole and reconciled. With this vision in our hearts and minds, we light this chalice. On Friday, while trying to get a handle on how best to approach the topic of telling your story, fact or fiction, I was given a riveting example. Like millions around the world, and apparently many of you, I was caught up in the drama of Dr. Christine Blasey Ford telling her story to the Senate Judiciary Committee of being sexually assaulted by President Trump's nominee for the United States Supreme Court, Brett Kavanaugh. I was deeply moved by her testimony and the price she was willing to pay to tell her story, even though the outcome of a questionable process had been foreordained by the Republican majority since day one. What good will telling her story do, some may ask? She has received death threats, been forced from her home, been subject to cruel and unsubstantiated character assassination, and much more for having done so. No matter what the ultimate vote on Kavanaugh is, the prevalence of sexual assault has been exposed once again. The reasons for it having been underreported in a patriarchal, misogynist society have been made prominently self-evident. And most importantly, it has given courage to a large number of women to now tell their story anyway. Telling your story can be liberating for yourself, for others, and for the common good. It can bring about change. I've clearly shown my hand. I found Dr. Ford completely credible. While I was inclined to do so in advance by others having come forward with similar accounts of Judge Kavanaugh's alleged egregious behavior, it was his blustery, intemperate response to her testimony that made her case for me. It reeked of elite male privilege that permitted him to angrily remonstrate against those who would deny him his rightful due. Imagine how a woman would be castigated for speaking similarly. I have to assume it was the only response available to him after her testimony, even though it revealed his utter unsuitability for the position for which he has been nominated. So, what insights did this drama offer about telling our story? What makes it fact or fiction? Anthropologists tell us that storytelling is central to human existence, that it's common to every known culture, that it involves a symbiotic exchange between teller and listener, an exchange we learn to negotiate in infancy. Just as the brain detects patterns in the visual forms of nature, a face, a figure, a flower, and in sound, so too it detects patterns in information. Stories are recognizable patterns, and in those patterns we find meaning. We use stories to make sense of our world and to share that understanding with others. They are the signal within the noise. There's clearly a driving force within us, that urges us to tell our story. And yet, there is some ambivalence about making ourselves vulnerable by doing so. What we tell a recent acquaintance will be different from a close friend who shares part of our story, as will the story we only tell ourselves. While we can control what we share, we cannot control how the listener hears it. We all have filters that evaluate and shape what we hear. That's why not everyone finds the same joke funny, or why everyone does not share my response to the Ford Kavanaugh testimonies. Then there is the challenge about how to tell the story. For 15 years, I mentored small groups seeking to obtain the equivalent of a seminary degree in theology. It was a 4-year commitment for each participant. Each of those 4 years began with writing and sharing our spiritual autobiography. As a mentor, I was not exempt from the task. One year, we were asked to write it much like a resume. I was born in 1949 in Coral Gables, Florida. I had one younger sibling. My father was a university professor. My mother was a homemaker. I began school in San Diego, etc. Not very captivating, but factual. Another year, we had to tell our story around milestones in our lives. First day of school, first date, first job, marriage, birth of a child, death of a parent, and the like. Still factual and in part verifiable, but more interpretive of how these milestones impacted us at the time and later. Certainly our story becomes a little more interesting. Another year, we had to select a few key events in our lives that most shaped where we were today in our journey. We were moving further away from factual, not in the sense that they weren't true, but they were our interpretation of the event. There might not have been any witnesses to them. They weren't documented, but they were no less real than a graduation diploma on our wall. We were moving into unsafe territory, as it often meant sharing mistakes, failures, disappointments, traumas, losses, as well as successes and times of joy. The depth and openness shared depended on the trust the individual felt with the group. These stories had a greater impact than the earlier ones because they were less individualized and more universal, allowing others to identify with the storyteller and hook their story to theirs. The fourth year, we had to take the previous year's list of events and choose one that most changed us. How did it impact how we see others and ourselves? Determines our life choices, our views of the world. No one wants to tell a story that says, I have never changed. I'm the same person I always was. It is stories of redemption that draw us in and help us find meaning in our own stories. These stories are less about fact versus fiction and more about truth. In 2003, author James Frey published a best-selling autobiographical memoir, A Million Little Pieces, purportedly detailing his struggle to overcome addiction. Nearly 3 years later, during an appearance on Oprah, he admitted that several supposedly factual details had been embellished or fabricated. All later editions of the book included a note from Frey admitting his embellishments, but claiming that his primary mistake had been writing about the person I created in my mind to help me cope, and not the person who went through the experience. Deep down, we are all raconteurs, drawing on past memories and weaving them into a coherent narrative to construct our autobiographical selves. Dan McAdams, a psychologist at Northwestern University who specializes in the autobiographical self, has identified 3 distinct layers to the autobiographical self. By the age of 2, most of us can recognize ourselves in mirrors and understand how we fit in relation to others. At this point, we are actors in our personal narratives, defining ourselves by explicit traits and the roles we play. We might be shy and conscientious students, while others are funny and outgoing and popular, for instance. Around the age of 8, we add another layer, the self as agent. Now, in addition to being actors in our own lives, we also perceive our own agency. We can look at our past, project into the future, and set goals, whether we want to become an astronaut, a writer, or merely find a best friend. Finally, as we move into early adulthood, we embrace the self as author, developing a narrative identity that we continue to hone for the rest of our lives, to describe what kind of actors we are and why, as agents, we do what we do. McAdams' conclusions are based on hundreds of personal life stories, interviews, conducted over many years with adults from all walks of life. The subjects are asked to imagine their lives as a book with chapters, just like a novel. Then McAdams asks them to focus on key scenes, a high point, a low point, a turning point, a negative early memory, a positive early memory, and so on. All universal elements of a good narrative. The broad strokes are the same. We all experience many such moments over the course of our lives, and that we weave them into our story as it evolves. Next, McAdams asks the subjects to identify those people who have filled the roles of heroes and villains. Subjects are also asked to think about future chapters, goals and aspirations, and how their values and beliefs are reflected in the full arc of the personal narrative. Finally, McAdams asks subjects to identify overarching themes running through their stories. One common theme is redemption, particularly among people he calls highly generative, those who volunteer in soup kitchens or political campaigns, start their own nonprofit charity, or otherwise seek to make a positive impact on the world. Their stories invariably involve hardship and suffering, but with an optimistic twist. They triumphed over their woes, learned valuable lessons from the pain, and emerged stronger for it. This doesn't mean that non-highly generative people are necessarily worse storytellers. Their stories just don't have highly redemptive themes. It requires a lot of hard work to be a generative person. How much easier would it be to just stay home and watch Dancing with the Stars? And McAdams thinks that having a strong redemptive narrative serves as a motivational tool. I think the lasting power of the world's great religions is their writings are full of redemptive stories that motivate us to be better human beings. Without redemptive stories, I would argue there would be no great literature. I don't want to live in a world without Beowulf, Jane Eyre, Ebenezer Scrooge, Jean Valjean, Anna Karenina, Raskolnikov, and so many more whose lives encompass overwhelming hardships, who struggle with all of our human frailties, suffer our guilt, find forgiveness, seek justice, find themselves in life's chaos while weaving their stories into ours. I'm a better person because of their fictional stories. Without them, would I be so passionate to reestablish a cosmic balance where the world is a little more just? Would I be as empathetic to those others would scorn? I suspect there are many numerous redemptive stories in this room today, waiting to be told. I base that on you being drawn to Unitarianism. We believe in a world that can be redeemed. It is why we stand up for justice and choose to be on the side of love. We have transformed theological thinking over the centuries, not just in our own tradition, to be more progressive, rational, and more open to change. I encourage you to tell your stories, no matter what the risk. They will give hope and vision and courage to others. And that could make all the difference. May it be so. For our meditation, I will give you a moment to think about yourself at a different age and what people might have thought about who you were, and maybe they haven't seen you since. So you are frozen in their memory at that stage. And how that might differ from who you are now. Where is the redemption in your story? My closing words are by Gene Olson. May you be brave enough to expose your aching woundedness and reveal your vulnerability. May you speak your deepest truth, knowing that they will change as you do. May you sing the music within you, composing your own melody, playing your song with all your heart. May you draw, paint, sculpt, and sew, showing the world your vision. May you write letters, poetry, biography, slogans, graffiti, the great novel, laying bare your words to love and hate. May you love even though your heart breaks again and again. And until the end of your days, may your life be filled with possibilities and courage.